Good evening, Americans. This is your favorite alien and Bubba here on Friday, January 10th. And Georgia, it's supposed to be a rainy weekend, stormy Saturday, and snow a week from today. Wow. Anyway, wanted to do a video to uh, get your attention to an article that was done by National Public Radio host Steve Inskeep, where he's comparing the situation today in 2020 with the situation in the 1856 election that was James Buchanan versus John C. Fremont. Well, Mr. Inskeep, you were saying in your article that the situation is similar to what you have here with President Trump, with the Democrats being the ones that were saying that they weren't going to win because the Republicans were changing the demographics and doing all this nastiness towards John C. Fremont. Uh, that's James Buchanan, you pointed out, that was doing all this nastiness to John C. Fremont uh, and calling him a birther, just like Obama was to Trump here. And yes, an immigrant, and that he shouldn't have been president because he wasn't a citizen. Well, Mr. Inskeep, and then you went on to say that the situation was that the Democrats didn't know if they were going to win again because the Republicans had shut them down on the slavery, and they didn't know if they had the ever going to win another election. Well, and then you pointed out that it's the same as today. Well, kind of yes and kind of no. You left out a few options there, Mr. Inskeep. The situation in 1856 was because you guys kicked the can down the road, basically. It reverts back to the Compromise of 1820. Remember that, Mr. Inskeep? Where you brought in Maine as a free state and Missouri as a slave state. Yes. And then South Carolina decided to call it null and void. Everything from the United States. Remember that? Well, it almost caused a civil war back in 1820, and the Compromise of 1820, which stipulated that one state comes in free, one state comes in slave. So they had a balance of power there. Okay. But it worked okay for 1820, 1830, 1840. 1845, the situation got really disastrous because there was two annexed states, Texas and Florida, and they were both slave states. Wasn't that fun there? So you see, Mr. Inskeep, that made a disastrous situation, and then you had the Mexican War the next year there. And in 1848, when the war was over, you had the Mexican Cession. All those western states. What are you going to do with them? One slave and one free per the Compromise of 1820? Really? No. So it caused a lot of problems. And then you had the election of 1848, which Rough and Ready won it, Zachary Taylor. And he didn't like the compromise that they were proposing in 1850. He was against the compromise of 1850. Well, unfortunately, old Rough and Ready kicked the bucket, and his successor, John Millard Fillmore, remember him? He was like the Trump of his day over there, wasn't he? Nobody liked Millard Fillmore. Anyway, he voted for the Compromise of 1850. Yeah, that was a disaster. That's like Trump's going in and saying, "Oh, I'm going to win impeachment." Yeah, that was a disaster too because he'll win and that'll be a disaster like the Compromise of 1850. Well, anyway, when the Compromise of 1850 went into effect in 1853, there was a disaster with the two states that were coming in, Kansas and Nebraska. So they passed the Kansas-Nebraska bill in 1854. Oh, that cost a civil war, remember? Kansas bled. Civil War in Kansas. Oh, remember that? Yeah. That was in 1854. Same year the Republican Party was formed. Then, well, uh, when you get to 1856, you had that. And then you had Mr. Buchanan going in there. The Democrats know that they were running out of time because uh, the western states, once they became states with the Mexican cessions, and by the way, California was admitted in 1850, so that really messed up the whole works there. They couldn't get their railroad. They wanted a railroad through the south and not through the north. Remember, the railroad was completed in 1869 after the Civil War. But yeah, you got all these issues here, Mr. Inskeep, which you don't come to put in your article. And when 1856 came around, the Democrats had all these issues. And the Republicans, of course, had John C. Fremont, which was not a good character to run for president. It's like running Joe Biden on the Democratic side. Basically the same. And James Buchanan had a field day. So you can't blame Buchanan for this. He had a field day with the Republicans put a bad candidate up there, John C. Fremont. And remember, you had an issue there of discourse. And the Civil War could have started in 1857 because remember that the Mormons had already established themselves in Desiree back in the 1840s. Desiree was a big state there. But because of the Mexican cession, their territory started to dwindle. And influence, American influence, were further west instead of theirs. So they were killing pioneers that went to the Oregon Trail. And in 1857, James Buchanan had no choice but to send federal troops over there. And he made a quid pro quo with them. You stop killing the pioneers going on the Oregon Trail, and we won't go get you for polygamy. Okay? But he forgot to tell them that he couldn't control Congress. And Congress kept on destroying their territory little by little, inch by inch, until by 1890, hey, you had Utah the way it is today. But, the situation that James Buchanan created in 1857 left a bad taste in the mouth that really came back to bite everybody in the derriere in 1860 when Lincoln got elected president, and therefore your Civil War. This is more complicated than it is, Mr. Inskeep, but you and your article didn't do justice to the American people. This is your favorite alien and Bubba saying good day.